When you're ready.
Good morning, my name is Abby Urbanik, and my team and I have researched the question of, should we experiment on the human genome? Our discoveries have led us to a solid conclusion with supporting evidence according to how we looked into the question. As I stated prior, our investigative question was, should we experiment on the human genome? After my team's research, we came to the solution that no, we should not experiment on the human genome. We investigated this question from 4 different perspectives: the political and historical perspective, the ethical perspective, the economic perspective, and the futuristic perspective. In the political and historical perspective, CRISPR-Cas9 technology sparked global controversy in 1975. Following this event, doctors from UCLA, Dr. Baltimore, and Dr. Berg raised biosecurity and ethics concerns. This arose in the Alsamar debate months after and called for the need of public output. From Dr. Edward from Thompson University, he points to the article in his standpoint of human genome editing that the Catholic Church opposes these alterations. This could possibly create moral debates and social tensions.
I will now be discussing the ethical lens. One major issue surrounding the ethics of gene editing is social inequity. The high cost of gene editing could make access unequal. If only the wealthy have access to gene editing, this can create further divides between social classes and widen the gaps between the haves and have-nots. Those with money would be able to dictate which traits were desirable, and those without would be further lacking. Cost is not the only barrier affecting social inequity. As Hercher from MIT states, religious beliefs, stigmas, and cultural context also play a role in the negative effects of acceptance of gene editing. Given the potential for social inequity is so high, further research on gene editing should not be done without more research to ensure equitable use. Another potential unintended consequence of gene editing is discrimination. It'd be morally objectionable for an individual to have the power to enhance or eliminate certain traits in a population. Editing the human genome would allow for such indiscriminate action, resulting in an environment where certain traits are favored and others are stigmatized. Commercializing genetic enhancements has the unintended consequences of deciding what traits are desirable. Those with designer attributes could flourish, and those without could be further discriminated against. As Hercher says, it makes the playing field less even, taking existing inequalities and turning them into something inborn. Commercialization implies choosing at a price. This in turn can lead to more discrimination by promoting unrealistic expectations of what traits are valued in society. Safety is another concern when exploring the ethics of genome editing. Missteps and failures in the space have shown potential for damaging and unintended consequences. As Salvas reports, current gene therapies and techniques can lead to large numbers of off-target mutations, potentially causing defects and disabilities. Given the damaging potential in human gene editing, we should be made aware of its dangers to both humans and the environment. Modifying genes can have negative effects on humans' health that far outweigh the benefits. This is even more worrisome when looking at future generation through germline editing. The fact that germline editing can not only change society now, but in the future is unsettling. Ultimately, individuals would not only be deciding their genetic makeup, but the genetic makeup, unethically deciding the genetic makeup of the future. Now I'll pass it to Bridget to talk about the economic perspective.
Thank you, Midge. Wealth inequality is already a global issue, and the addition of genome editing within the society can make this problem worse. Barry Collar with the University of Rockefeller, New York, states that if human genome editing is successful in advancing those who undergo the procedure, by definition, it is likely to result in inequality. This new biological inequality will be grafted upon our current wealth inequality, which has been advancing at an alarming rate over the past several decades. So, human genome editing is likely to result in discrimination against those who are unable to afford genetic advancements. Human genome editing techniques have already been implemented in human daily lives, which has been increasing the demand for new product analysis methods, says Zhen Chang from the Beijing Advanced Innovation Center for Food Nutrition and Human Health. This demand, driven by individuals, companies, and scientists, risks a focus on power and limiting the accessibility to only the wealthy. This power shift that is fueled by the potential for profits for scientists and laboratories are benefiting businesses and manufacturers at the expenses of their customers. Consequently, researchers are racing to discover these new demands and methods and allowing them to increase the prices for their customers. Universal access to easy and affordable healthcare is a common desire that all people want to achieve. Barry Collar says, a state may enhance worker productivity and reduce healthcare costs by requiring heritable human genome editing to reduce blood pressure, reduce cholesterol levels, and reduce the risk for HIV infections, all which can be achieved by inactivating currently known genes. Inversely, there is a concern that healthcare costs will be reduced for those who have been genetically advanced. Equal access with healthcare service emerged as an important value. This affected considerations of cost to the healthcare system, which in turn underscored arguments that editing should only be allowed in cases of serious health conditions, says Don Thaddler with the University of KwaZulu-Natal. The impact of this on future generations will now be discussed by Elliot Schultz.
When looking at the general population in the coming years, it is unlikely society will not have a population where children are edited before they're born. One of the issues that arises from parents having to choose this procedure done is the widening gap between the families who can't afford to have these perfect designer babies and the families who cannot. Society thus would become unfit for people to live in after this pivotal change in the wealth gap. An example of this dystopian future is portrayed in the movie Gattaca. The film represents the classism that takes place in jobs and how the lesser respected jobs are left for the invalids or the imperfect. In any aspect of life, not just jobs, there would be a constant unfair competition between the two sides of classism. As a consequence of the unpredictability and newness of genetically modifying of human, many unknowns have yet to be discovered. For example, scientists have been concerned over the fact that over the possibility of undiscovered long-term effects. As mentioned by Yale Insights, the fear then is that those changes lead to antibiotic resistance or mutations that could go out in the population and would be very difficult to control. Even certain agriculture companies are hesitant about the use of genetically modifying genomes. Potential unintended side effects of this process are not yet well discovered, so additional research is needed prior to using this new technique. The issue of insufficient research is prolonged by the restrictions on germline editing. Although the U.S. has no outright ban on gene editing, a restrictive regulatory landscape and a lack of federal support has imposed significant restrictions on researchers. Future generations can be harmed by the rapid growth of human genome editing in multiple ways. The distinguished fact that one part of the population will never live up to the other part of the population could cause constant existential questions. As said by Suffian in the Scientific American, but our genetic conditions are not simply entities that could be clipped away from us like a misspelled word or an awkward sentence in a document. We are whole beings with our genetic conditions forming a fundamental part of who we are. Still, many Americans consider lives such as ours not worth living as they are. This passage represents how the values of society may be disrupted and skew people's perspectives on whether or not they are good enough for the rest of society. Other disadvantages other than physical ones can include the mental fortitude of future generations when considering the rising popularity of genome therapies. In conclusion, we should not experiment on the human genome due to the factors of historical and political, ethical, economic, and futuristic perspective discussed.
All right, a couple of questions. Elliot, give one specific way your thinking changed as a result of learning about Bridget's findings.
Bridget's point of widening the wealth gap between the rich and the poor was similar to what I touched on in my essay and strengthened my argument with additional sources and research. For example, Bridget included a quote from Delhague et al. That encompassed the overarching idea that the next generation within the higher classes will be genetically superior, thus creating discrimination against those that are natural.
Okay, thank you. Bridget, reflecting on your colleagues' work, Which one had the greatest impact on your overall understanding of the problem your group identified?
Midge's work on finding effects on wealth inequality through the ethical lens had the greatest impact on my thinking. Two other lenses, Elliot's in futuristic and mine economic, had focused on the wealth inequality, but I thought that Midge's had the best impact. Her finds of religious and ethnic beliefs blocking people from being able to obtain genome editing made me think differently on how discrimination in groups could form.
Okay, thank you. Midge, if you had another team member, what other perspective could they have researched that would have been useful, made a useful contribution to your project?
If we had another team member, I think we would have explored the scientific lens. This lens could have potentially added a good counter-argument to our answer of no, along with showing more background information of what genome editing is and the technologies and science behind it. Our lenses of political, historical, ethical, futuristic, and economic do not fully help the readers and listeners to understand what genome editing is, so scientific lens could give more background and insight on that.
Okay, thanks, Midge. Abby, what's an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' individual reports that you decided to exclude from your team's presentation, and why?
One important argument that we decided to exclude was my research on the Rwandan genocide and the Holocaust. We mainly excluded this argument because we did not have enough time to include and felt that other research would be stronger. We decided that the Rwandan genocide and the Holocaust research weren't essential to our claim, and we did not need to discuss that much background while we wanted to talk more about the future and current events. Even though these events were not deemed essential for our claim, they shed light on sensitive topics of eugenics and sterilization. We resonate deeply with many sensitive topics of eugenics and sterilization, which represent deeply with many underrepresented communities. It is vital to recognize these historical contexts while emphasizing the current and future effects of human genome editing in our discourse.
Okay, thank you. Another round of applause.